Folks, welcome to our international podcast, Below the Belt. We trust that you guys are great. We trust you've had a fantastic weekend. Thanks to all of you who joined our morning program, FYI, for your information, but who are nonetheless spilling over into our podcast at the 12 o'clock hour. Folks, we got a program for you this afternoon. You're going to want to make some notes. This program, to be fair, was first aired on the Alliance for Change platform, and we broadcasted it on Credible Sources platform over the weekend as well, but it was first broadcasted on Alliance for Change. And it has three presenters, Dr. Kamani Nahusi. We have also attorney at law Nigel Hughes. Was distracted here for a second. And we have also attorney at law Nigel Hughes, by the way, is of the law firm Hughes, Fields and Stobie. Now that I need to remind you folks, the best law firm in the country, Hughes, Fields and Stobie. And we have also Professor Shamir Ali, who is our former ambassador to Kuwait, who are part of the panel of this program. They're discussing race relations in Guyana, problems and solutions. It's a fantastic program. Dr. Kamani Nahusi takes the lead. Of course, he is of international renown, Guyanese of international renown, and he takes the lead here. And he has, folks, written extensively on Caribbean history. He understands, not only by virtue of being Guyanese, but by virtue of having done the academic work, our history like few other people do. One of his books, People's Political History of Guyana, 1838 to 1864, is one of my own favorites. People's Political History of Guyana, 1838 to 1964. I don't know if I have a copy of it. I don't know if Austin's bookstore have a copy. I must check it out to see if Austin's got a copy. Dr. Kamani Nahusi is not any fly-by-night academic, any fly-by-night historian, any fly-by-night doctor with an earned PhD. You know, some folks out here can't say the same thing. An earned PhD. And they're going to walk us through, folks, this topic of race relations in Guyana, problems and solution. Folks, I know I usually give a shout out to lots of folks. I wanna just get right into the meat of this discussion that was aired last Saturday. And folks, I know even if you heard it before, you know, listen again, and don't only do that, share the damn live, smash that emoji button. And folks, we want to encourage you guys as well to partner with us, because without your help we can't keep moving forward and doing what we do here, folks. We thank you for your love. We thank you for your support. Partner with us, folks. Please do that. You got a story for us? 627-6963. Partner with us as well, good folks. And we got some advertising space as well for you folks, for your business, for your service. We got some advertising space for your products. We got some advertising space for anything you want to put out there to get some mileage on. We got some advertising space for you guys, and we're going to come back at the end and wrap things up. Thanks for joining us again. And you're joining the live now. Share the damn live. Smash that emoji button. We hope that you guys grab lunch. In the process of grabbing lunch, we trust that you guys have had a fantastic morning. Let's head right into that discussion, folks. Let's head right in.
Keynote participant, Professor Dr. Kamani, a Guyanese to the bone, UG BA 1977, MA 1988, PhD University College of London 1989, 39 pages resume, who knows no, an outstanding 20 articles, 17 chapters in books. Very youthful looking. I'm seeing him for the first time on the screen. I have to confess, truth will always be truth. He's also professor at Department of Africology and African American Studies at the outstanding Temple University in Philadelphia. Ladies and gentlemen, race relations are the ways in which people of different races living together in the same community behave towards one another. Overall, in Guyana, with all due respect, the PPP government must address the ongoing issues of divisiveness, cast out, marginalization of the Guyanese. Some people are saying these days that the PPP government stands for plenty, poverty persists. Media spinners and self-appointed analysts are using self-promoting analysts to cover the truth of racism, marginalization, and 3Fs, friends, families, and favorites by the current government, which is very, very plain for all to see. A day or two ago, Village Voice editor said, it's a one Guyana bubble. Today, we will discuss and offer solutions for one people, one nation, one destiny. It is my honor, delight, and joy to be on this panel, and I introduce Attorney Nigel Esquire, a Guyanese patriot from an illustrious Hughes family in the Cooperative Republic of Guyana.
Good evening, Doc. Thank you very much for that introduction. Dr. Nehusi, it is a privilege to have you on the program, and I don't think we have that much time, so let me jump right into it. And I'm going to open with a quotation from you. This is a quotation from a publication that you did called Unity in Diversity or Farce and Strife. And let me just start with this. And you quote, "Too many of us have come to believe that there is something bad in the recognition of race and cultural differences and feel awkward at the first mention of these aspects of our reality. The result is the avoidance of or lessening the chances of any constituent race or cultural groups." So, picking up on that, I want first of all to commend the Alliance for Change for starting a national discussion on this vexed issue of race, which several people have avoided or some pretend don't exist. Dr. Nehusi, can you just briefly give us your understanding of why it is race is such a difficult topic for people to acknowledge in Guyana and want to discuss at all?
Thank you very much, Nigel, and thank you very much, Professor Ali. Before I answer your question directly, Nigel, I hope you as the host and our listeners and viewers will permit me just a moment to say thanks to the AFC for putting on a discussion on what is definitely, if not the most important question, an urgent one facing Guyanese, one of them. Race is of the greatest importance to us because we have been divided along racial lines for the longest time. But I want to step back also and make an observation, which is that it's not race alone that has divided us. It's anything that's different. And there's an important reason for us for that. And that's why it's significant for us to understand why this is so. The people who oppressed all Guyanese in general, and I'm talking about the European colonizers now, they looked for any difference to oppress people. And let me also acknowledge that even within Europe, before Europeans spread abroad, there were differences in class, there were differences in gender or sex, and there were religious differences. Europeans didn't forget those differences, really, when they went abroad. Sometimes they united, but many of those differences were imposed upon the people they colonized. So what really materialized was a system in which difference from the European male, who was the primary in all of this, but generally differences from Europeans lessened your chances and your opportunities for progress and any other thing. So if you were different from Europeans, the amount of difference you were from them made your chances of receiving opportunities for growth, receiving respect, receiving money, receiving anything of value was lessened. And it's important for us to grapple with that, because this is the explanation of race. Race is one of the most obvious ways in which people differ, because it's physical difference. It's something you see all the time. And some people, scholars, have said that race is a fiction. There's no real racial difference, because the things that make us different just make up about 3% of the human genome. And there are other things about that I really don't want to go too much into, but African people throughout the world, Black people, are discriminated against. But the original human being was an African.
True.
The gene pool of Africa contains the genes of every other race in this world.
Amen.
The opposite is not true. There's no other race in the world that contains all the genes of African people. Now, I don't want to dwell too much on that. My point is that because of the historical role of Europeans in politicizing race, we still suffer from that. And unless we understand the origins of our affliction and we understand the nature of this affliction, we are in no proper position to address our problem intelligently. And I do agree with what Nigel said and what Professor Ali said. Too many governments have avoided race. I believe part of the reason of the avoidance is ignorance. They really don't know much about it. But I think also that much more powerful is the desire to use race as a mobilizing factor to get into power. It's easy to do that. It's very dangerous also. It puts our country nowhere. And therefore, my long answer to your question, Nigel, is just this. And we have to face the question of race from an intelligent point of view and stop dodging. I think that this beginning, I hope it's a beginning, should involve everybody. We should listen to each other, and we should educate each other. That's one of the words used.
Amen. Amen.
Professor, with your permission, can I?
No, please, you go ahead.
Sure,
go right ahead. You have the book. You have the book. You're ahead of me. You are way ahead.
Okay. Kimani, again, coming back to you. In the same paper, you say we must not confuse racial and cultural identity with citizenship. All races and cultures and mixtures must have equal citizenship. The rights, privileges, and corresponding responsibilities to the nation of Guyana upon condition that no one injures the genuine interests of anyone. And before we come into the history, the question I really have for you there is that quite often there is a confusion in the discussion and the reluctance to discuss race in Guyana because people think race and cultural identity is to be created with citizenship. I don't know if very briefly you can perhaps share those differences so that we can people can get a better understanding, and then we can head straight into the key issues that will engage us today.
Race, culture, and citizenship. Race is physical appearance, and like I said just now, I think we invest too much in it, or physical differences. Culture is our way of life, and this is, I think, a very, very important aspect of what we're dealing with. Pattern behavior. And different people or different cultures need to coexist in Guyana. It's not because somebody is different that that person is either superior or inferior. And I really want to underline this because this is something Guyanese must learn if we're going to go forward. We have to accept differences because difference is a way of humanity. They're men, they're women, they're short, they're tall. There are all kinds of differences. And somebody's difference does not necessarily, ipso facto that is, make the person either inferior to you or superior to you. So the question is for Guyana, how do we practice citizenship? Citizenship is the right to be equal in being Guyanese, in getting all the benefits as well as the responsibilities of living in Guyana and being Guyanese. So what I'm talking about with citizenship is that it should not matter who you are. You must have the same rights and privileges as the other person. So if we're talking about getting a good education, if we're talking about access to health, it doesn't matter what it is. Now, these things are not going to be exactly equal because we're coming from where we're coming from. But we must be establishing systems that will guarantee relative equality in rights for all Guyanese. And this should mean civic education in the sense of all of us should be participating in choosing who governs us, for want of a better word, and also in making certain that people do their jobs, because political participation shouldn't end when you put the ballot in the box. You should be involved. You should be saying, no, we don't want that. We want this. Get involved in your village at every level. So for me, the practice of citizenship is an equal access to resources as well as equal discharge of responsibility. And the citizen is somebody or people of different races, cultures, genders, sexual orientation. It doesn't matter what the difference is. Once it's not a criminal difference or something immoral that would disqualify you from social participation, Guyana has a beautiful chance of showing to the world that different people could come together to make a single nation.
Okay, so let's go to the start. I hear you there. We're going to come back to that because, like you say, equality and equity are perhaps difficult to achieve in precise terms. But let's go back to two towering figures in the history of Guyana, Dr. Chetty Jagan and Mr. Forbes Burnham. Can you put them in historic perspective in relation to the issue of race in politics and race in the development of Guyana, the nation?
Yes, thanks. That's a beautiful question because Dr. Jagan and Mr. Burnham stand at a defining point in the history of Guyana and in the racial history of Guyana, the political history of Guyana. They weren't alone, but they're leaders in the sense that they led their parties, but also they stand out in living memory as two of the more important figures. They came to the scene, the national scene in Guyana, Dr. Jagan returned from studies in the United States in 1943, and he launched a very lonely campaign in the legislature on behalf of all Guyanese, the downtrodden. And it's important to say that Dr. Jagan was defending and advancing the interests of all Guyanese, African Guyanese, Indian Guyanese, whosoever Guyanese were. He was joined later on, around 1950, by Mr. Burnham, who returned around then from studies in England. And the short story is that they formed what is the original PPP. And it's important to make this distinction.
Sorry, when you say they formed the PPP, was this after the PAC, which is the People's Action Committee?
Mm-hmm.
Okay, I was just clarifying that.
It was after the Political Affairs Committee.
Affairs Committee, sorry.
Yeah, it was started in 1946 by Dr. Jagan, Mrs. Janet Jagan, um,
Ashton Chase.
Ashton Chase.
Yeah,
Yeah.
UC.
No, AUC
No, AUC
came
wasn't in
up
there.
after
No.
them.
Okay.
It was essentially Ashton, Janet, and
No,
Jenny, I believe.
Hubbard.
Oh yeah.
Hubbard.
And Joyce
Very,
Hess-
very, very, very important figure in the history of Guyana, political history of Guyana. So these were the main drivers, and they were very clear that the PAC was meant to mobilize people to form what would be the original PPP, which was a multiracial political party. So
Interesting.
when 1950 came around, they thought that things were right to form and launch the original People's Progressive Party, which I must insist was a multiracial party. The leaders of that party were primarily Dr. Cheddi Jagan and Mr. Forbes Burnham. Everybody agreed at that point in time that Dr. Jagan was the political leader of Guyana because he'd been there in the trenches, 7 years before. And he was often the lone voice before anybody else mobilized on a national scale with that amount of longevity, endurance. There were people before Mr. Burnham and Dr. Jagan, stretching back to the 1840s, who started political organizations. But these were limited for different reasons. The first really national political organization was the original PPP. That's a short version of it. And they won political power in a way that no Guyanese outfit, no Guyanese political organization had won political power before. It was very, very limited. We say we were independent later on and that kind of thing, but all of these labels have limitations on them. But in terms of the ability to be decisive in determining our political destiny, and more important, in my estimation, in addressing the question of race in Guyana, Dr. Jagan and Mr. Burnham stand at the inception of comprehensive room and ability to do that.
All right. On Burnham and Jagan, and you quote Corey Fraser at the start of your chapter number 16, entitled Cheddi Jagan and Forbes Burnham in Colonial Guyana, the Formation of Political Personalities in the Plantation Society. You say, quoting Corey Fraser, you say, the long struggle between these two imposing nationalist leaders compromised the future of Guyana, inhibited the development of the idea of a Guyanese nation. Their exploitation of deep-seated inter-ethnic resentments and tensions and their partisan strategies for electoral mobilization and governance have left a bitter legacy. Now, that quotation which you chose to start that chapter speaks, first of all, to the divisive politics, ethnic politics, and the fact that they perhaps were the cause of the deep-seated inter-ethnic resentment and tensions, and as a result of that, electoral mobilization since then seems to be on ethnic grounds. Talk to us a little bit about that.
Well, I think you've got it, and the quotation has it. I would say that.
Sorry, can I be difficult and say,
yes,
when
please.
When did the racial tension in politics really start?
No.
What was there? A series of incidents? Was it the society was inherently racist? What, if you had to pinpoint either a day, date, month, or period when racial politics became preeminent in Guyana's political life, British Guyana at the time, when would you identify that?
At the beginning of the European presence. Please hold me. I want to make an explanation. Please hold me, though, to the question of Mr. Burnham and Dr. Jagan, because, as I said, at the advent of these two figures, Guyanese were most able to address this situation And we haven't done it. We've made a mess of it. But to be fair to them and to be honest and precise with our history, and for me, history is always social history.
Mhm.
Racial politics in Guyana began when Europeans began to colonize Guyana. And it's important for us to understand that colonialism was a system in which white people oppressed other people by race, by culture, by anything they could, and exploited them to carry the wealth back to Europe. Let's be, I mean,
Oh yeah,
our
the,
language is
the,
color.
the entire from the time Columbus got here, that was the basis for them to come here. They first of all, yeah, we've got the history, what they did with the indigenous Indians, what they did with the Aztecs, the Incas, all the way through Latin America. But I really wanted to focus, because of the time, on contemporary Guyana's political history. And these leaders, well, they clearly, from your explanation, didn't start it, but there clearly was an exploitation of race in furtherance of political motives, and they might have been justified.
Was it a statement Apanjat had that anything to do with it? That
Yeah,
Apanjat?
yeah, I want to come to that in a moment.
Okay,
But
okay.
let us understand. Let us understand that everything was racialized in Guyana, but because racialization was so normalized, we don't usually see it. African spiritual system was banished. It was criminalized. Today, many African Guyanese attend European churches, so-called Christian churches. That was really introduced to us by white people to enslave us in the most fundamental way, mental enslavement. Christianity teaches us nothing about our history and culture except to hate it. And I mentioned that fact because this is one of the things colonialism did. And it became normalized, the taxation system. Who paid for those churches? Tax on African Guyanese. So we inherited, Barnum and Jagan inherited a system that was comprehensively, deeply racist.
Good.
Legally, everything. So
I'm happy.
Go ahead.
I was going to say, I'm happy you said that, but here's the thing about Burnham and Jagan. Both of them were highly politically conscious. They were aware of what was going on. It was a time when there was a lot of movements throughout the world for independence of state. India, Kenya, Nigeria, Biafran War. So the global climate was there. So my question is, these two highly educated, very conscious men, because both of them understood the fundamentals of exploitation that led to colonialism and the whole venture of bringing human cargo here and then, of course, replacing it with indentured labor. Why is it that, was it more convenient for the purposes of political power to exploit what were inherent ethnic cleavages in the society for the purpose of achieving political power? And I do have a follow-up after you answer that in relation to options that face both Burnham and Jagan.
All right. I insist on stepping back, even if just for a moment, and say that at the point in time, the narrative you just gave appeared opposite. It appeared to be true. But it's adventurous to say that colonialism would be ended by a political struggle. And that's the reason why I was talking about the deep-seated organization of society along racial lines. The physical withdrawal of Europeans from colonial places didn't mean the end of colonialism. And Burnham and Jagan, politically conscious, as you said, advanced and so on as they were, both of them had weaknesses, if I might say that. I want to dramatize this because you really can't blame them for it, but reality is reality. Neither of the two of them understood the cultural history of their own people and of each other's people. Burnham nor Jagan did not understand the history of Africa or the history of India and the culture of Africa and India. Yes, they both paid respects and that kind of thing, but we're talking about something far deeper that colonialism deprived them of. And I think that this is one of the weaknesses, one of the challenges, if you want a better word, that faces Guyana today. We need to know more about ourselves and about each other. Barnum and Jagan found it easy, and this began with Dr. Jagan, to rely on race as a mobilizing factor for politics. Now, I want to put in a word here.
Why do you say
Because the
began with
numbers,
Jagan?
because the numbers of the population.
Let me finish, please.
Okay.
You know,
We bubbling
what you're doing epitomizes our challenge in Guyana. The moment we say politics, race, and that kind of thing, people get agitated. I wanted to say that it's easy for us to blame Dr. Jagan, and many people did, and they call him racist and that kind of thing. And I always make this point. I'm not saying he was or he wasn't. It's not for me to judge. I don't know enough. I've spoken to Dr. Jagan on numerous occasions. He didn't strike me to be that kind of person. Okay. But he's one person.
Yeah.
He's leading a political party.
Yes.
And the decision to rely on race, especially after 1955 when Barnum was expelled from the party, suggests to me that the Jagans and Mrs. Jagan, Janet was involved in this, were looking for an easy way to get votes. And it's something that faces all politicians and has faced all politicians in Guyana from then. Are you going to rattle the racial thing and get some votes so that you could get power? Or are you going to allow the other person to do it? This is the situation in which Barnum and Jagan found themselves. And while we could today say, well, the choice was easy, you know, you had to avoid race and that kind of thing, I think we need to put ourselves in the positions of those two guys. Now, I'm not a supporter of either two of them. In my political life, I mean, I was being an African Guyanese, I was born in the PNC, but, you know, I was put out and blah, 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 because I wasn't an uncritical.
So as a country, and as have we in 2023 moved away from the use of ethnic, racist, whatever you racial?
No.
Sorry,
no,
we've not.
No,
we have not. Okay.
No,
no. Before you go there, I want to ask you, for the same reason that you just identified, political leaders tend to go for what is easier to be able to give them power. Isn't that the argument that is being used today for the election of governments? Look, don't let me fight up and talk about I can pay lip service to, etc., etc. But it is easier for me on the political, on the ethnic pulpit to get votes.
Yeah, but that's a very...
It's a question. I'm not. There's no assumption in that.
Okay, but I mean, people do that. Lots of politicians do that, and it's a very stupid, backward, puerile, childish approach to politics.
But if it delivers power,
but you see, it delivers power, but for how long and to do what? And
well, Guyana's a living testament.
Let me answer this, Nigel. We've got to be serious about our country. And if you're telling me, or anybody's telling me, that it's okay to rattle the racial thing and get into power, and then you build up your racial, it doesn't matter which race group it is, but we know that today it's happening among Indian political leaders. You build up your community, you give them all kinds of resources, you impoverish the other community. What is going to happen down the line? What is going to happen down the line?
Well,
one of the things I said in the piece you were reading, I think, is that piece, is that Guyanese have discovered, and I probably would correct my language now and say we should have discovered, or at least the political leaders, that an Indian Guyanese government without African Guyanese participation is doomed to failure. And opposite to African Guyanese government without Indian participation is doomed to failure.
Well, can I be the devil's advocate? What is failure? The reality is that we have continued to live with racial governments since independence, or people who have always felt excluded. let me just quote you here. You say, after 28 years, and this was a couple of years ago, 28 years of PNC rule and 22 years of PPP rule since independence, the majority of Guyanese now appear resolved that an East Indian government that excludes the majority of African people is as objectionable as an African government that excludes the majority of East Indian Guyanese. That's a fact. But you spoke just now about failure. Where's the failure? There's no
Well, I was
failure.
about to
The
tell you
country is
that.
continuing.
No, you may continue to have a shiny housing scheme there, a couple of roads there, and so on. But what's going to happen down the road?
What you mean by
You
down
see,
the road?
I'm trying to give you failure, right? If you do not develop relatively equally all your people, you are building in a continuation of resentments. If you impoverish people to such an extent, you're making them prey to the highest bidder. The politics of the belly become important. If you impoverish communities, you're encouraging crime. Let's be honest.
Yeah.
You know?
I get that. But you said failure. And all I'm saying is
a crime
Guyana has been like that for the longest while.
Is a failure. And a society that doesn't engage its education system, and by this I mean the formal education system as well as the popular education system, in making people understand who they are, why they must be involved in their own villages and so on, is a failure. And could I finish, please? If we look at Guyana today, there was a point in time when all the villages in Guyana, especially African Guyanese villages, had a functioning village council.
Yes.
People were involved.
Yep, I can remember. Yep.
You know?
Yeah.
And if you're telling me that what passes today for villages is either equal to or an advance of that time long ago or not so long ago, then I will doubt you. And this is one of the ways, let me finish, in which we measure failure. Let me continue. There's a point in time when the teacher, the postmaster, the lawyer, all of these professionals were very respected people in our communities.
Notary public, all,
We have taken several steps backward, you know, and we must ask, we must ask ourselves, what are the consequences for society? But there's a deeper question. Where does all of this come from? We have devalued ourselves. We have made it more important to have political allegiance, which will deliver resources, than to have values, to have education, to have commitment, to have other things that make us merit what we get. So our meritocracy has been devalued. And you see this. Look at how the roads are used in Guyana today. I mean, some minibus driver, somebody just comes and cuts in front of you, and we accept this. This is rude behavior. And if it was confined to the road, we would have said, well, maybe. But that behavior is an expression of something that's deeper and something that is national and that expresses itself in other aspects of the Guyanese reality. So we are facing a situation in which a lot has been devalued. And one of my points is this, that because of racial mobilization getting people in politics, our politicians have, perhaps learned is the correct word, to ignore the interests of the sections of Guyana that did not, or they think did not vote for them. And even the people who voted for them, if you look at it, are not really intimately or as involved in running the country and making choices and so on, as a real consultative democracy, as Forbes Barnum used to say. would have been.
But isn't that if there are no consequences, then they can ignore it? Isn't that the way politicians operate?
Well, of course.
Right. So the whole question. So coming back to, because I want to go to the resources of the country in a minute, but coming back to this issue about politicians ignoring several racial groups that don't support them. If there are no consequences, then they can continue to rule in that fashion indefinitely, can't they? So this, what you describe as failure, will be a permanent state of affairs.
Well, I don't think so. We come back to what we call consequences. You see, the consequences are not restricted to what happens at the ballot box in the next national cockfight between racial sections. Consequences are some of those things I was talking about just now. How people behave, how you criminalize one section of a population, you impoverish sections of the population. These are things that breed instability in a population. They breed insecurity in a population. And we haven't even talked about challenges that have been inherited from colonialism that are still festering in Guyanese society. You know, this particular area, we could talk about you mentioned the living consequences of this, the way in which economy and society was structured. Paul Slow mentioned the way in which the military was structured. We still live with the consequences of these. We still live with the consequence of intergenerational trauma that African people inherited and continue to inherit from the plantation. I mean, each one of these needs an entire session to even begin to describe and address it. But I just wanted to put out something here quickly. You know, not too long ago, many Westerners, white people, were kidnapped in Arab countries and held for ransom. And an interesting thing happened at the end of any one of those experiences. They were flown to a base in Germany and they were given treatment for post-traumatic stress disorder syndrome. These are people who were held for 5 months and the longest, sometime a year or so. Think about what happened to African Guyanese or African people on the plantation. Most of us don't even have an elementary description of what happened. And I'm talking about people who were oppressed for life, who could have been sold at a moment's notice, whose culture was criminalized, who were raped. Men, women, boys, girls were raped every day on these plantations. That was part of the living. If you fought for freedom, your hand could be cut off in the first instance, a foot, you could be beheaded and your head put on spike. Terror was ritualized. If Kimani or Nigel led a freedom struggle, we were raped publicly. The entire village was assembled and forced to see that kind of thing happen. We carry, as Martin Carter said, we carry a mark that no shower of tears could shift. And any decent administration will tackle something like that. It hasn't happened, not in Guyana, not anywhere. We could talk about reparations. When Europeans decided, in their own interest partly, and also because of the pressure African resistance inflicted upon them, to end some of the physical aspects of enslavement, illegally ended, they compensated themselves. The victims were not compensated. And, you know, talking about racism in Guyana and race in Guyana means understanding each one of these issues, because they're still alive in the lives of Guyanese, not only African Guyanese, but all Guyanese. Because, you know, I mean, all right.
I accept it. Can I just come to economy and resources?
Yes.
There was a publication called Economy and Justice. I don't know if you've had an opportunity to look at it. But
No.
but essentially, it looked at all the key economic areas in which the government was awarding contracts or awarding licenses or distributing the resources of the country. It looked at road contracts that showed,
That's
only
your
90%.
publication?
Yeah,
Good.
my publication, right.
Mhm.
Road contracts, the licenses for offshore blocks,
Yeah.
and it
I'm
showed
familiar with
a
that.
huge disparity.
Mhm.
What do you think are the consequences of that in a multiracial society? And secondly, how would you seek to address that?
All right. I'll add another
Sure, please
aspect of
feel.
that. But
Sure.
let me come directly to what you said. The consequences are some of the things I've been trying to talk about. If you give resources that enable a particular section of the society, that section of the society is going to grow materially richer. It's likely that it's going to grow culturally richer, or at least in terms of the ability to put on cultural expressions. It's going to grow more enhanced, more empowered than other sections that have been prevented from doing this, getting these resources. So you're going to create an imbalance in resource distribution, which at the end of the day would mean that you're enriching one section and you're impoverishing another section. What that does is to create resentment, among other things. So you're creating resentment in the society because people are not stupid. They may not have a PhD or whatever, how many CXCs and so on, but all human beings could think, and they would see what's going on in the society. They know that the society is unfair to them, and they're going to grow up with resentment. You're going to have people who are going to be destructive, who are going to have hatreds and that kind of thing. And the tendency is to blame those people. Nobody or nobody much looks at the underlying factors that produce that kind of citizen who doesn't even understand how to be a citizen. So we continue to blame the victim. We do not put the responsibility for bringing about the situation where that responsibility lies. So to go to your other question, how do we address something like this? Well, you address it first by doing what we're doing, talking about it. Then you mobilize and organize against it. You put political leaders, functionaries who understand this challenge and will address it. You need equitable distribution of resources. But you mentioned the word before, equity. That is very important. And that goes some way to addressing the underlying problems that I talk about. Because the question of the economy in Guyana is an interesting one. We hear lots of people correctly talking about the imbalance in the security forces, the racial imbalance in the security forces. And that's true. And it's being addressed, but not in any way that it should be addressed. There are huge problems that are being created in the security forces. But nobody talks about the imbalance in the economy of Guyana. We don't talk about it. But yet it is something that has been brought about not by excellence or excellence in any one section of our population. Let me put it straight. African people were prevented from excelling in the economy. Portuguese were promoted to middle class status, and many Indian people benefited more than African people benefited. Now, this didn't happen because of the people, the Europeans who were in charge of the economy of Guyana at that point in time, it didn't happen because they liked any one of these groups more than the other and blah, blah, blah. It happened because they thought it was in their interest to do these things. And what I need to say is that all of us, all race groups in Guyana, have been used and abused. Even when we got a small advantage or a significant advantage over another race group, we were being used. So let me say something. African Guyanese, immediately after the legal termination of physical enslavement in 1838, launched a movement that was an alternative, a civilized alternative to the barbarism that was practiced by Europeans on the plantations. Most of us know about the village movement, or we know something about it, but it was far wider than a village movement. And while I don't want to go too much into that, because there's a lot of things about the village movement we don't know, Africans organized the retail trade. Europeans taxed African Guyanese out of that retail trade. They also shot pigs, cut down fruit trees, flooded lands. If you had a donkey cart, you had to pay tax. If you had a donkey, you had to pay tax. You're selling by the roadside, tax. You had a ballyhoo, tax. While the estates had 300 tons, 600 mules, no tax. You know, and we don't understand that taxation in Guyana was socialized, but the disbursement of the tax was privatized. Tax was collected from African Guyanese, and it wasn't spent in the interests of African Guyanese. The villages were neglected. Fact is, white people, the colonists, aristocracy, made agricultural pursuits outside of estates unattractive.
Interesting.
Many African Guyanese had to leave their village lands because it couldn't offer them a living anymore because of those policies. We don't know this. And that's why the country town drift started. Many people started going to live in Georgetown and became the
civil servants
and so on. Many people went into the gold bush and the diamond bush. This is why you had those movements. But we haven't understood this. So when we're talking about a Guyana today, and we see the kind of disbursements you're talking about, Nigel, it's not something painfully, but we got to be honest. This is not something that's new to Guyana. We may think it's new, but the way in which some sections of our populations have been enriched before is exactly through the control of resource distribution and making certain that certain favored groups get and certain other groups did not get. This is the history of Guyana we're talking about here. You know, so although it's reprehensible what's being done, if we want to understand our country and our people better, we'll have to step back and look at these patterns that existed in our society long before.
Dr. K, one quick question. Is there any truth that the African taxes were used to bring indentured labor into Guyana?
Yes and no. Part of indentureship was paid for by the planters. Where did the planters get their money? Taxing African Guyanese. And even when Indian Guyanese were on the plantations on the indentureship, they weren't paying taxes.
Interesting.
Right? I mean, you could pursue this even more than that. The villages, African villages, were attacked because white people didn't like us. What happened when Dr. Jagan and Mr. Burnham started the original People's Progressive Party and started to expose the nastiness that reigned on the estates among Indian Guyanese? Community centers were built. You remember that? That's how you're going to get Kanai and Butcher and all of those guys. That's how you're going to get Mutasami and all the other Harry Powell, and all the other athletes, because the estates were centers now of civil society.
Yes.
The sugar industry labor welfare fund funded building houses. Who benefited?
I know.
Who did not benefit? We often don't ask these questions. So, Nigel, you see how the structuring of Guyanese economy and society has been going on right before our eyes. And I'm not saying that is wrong for Indian people to receive this kind of benefit.
It must be equal for all.
If you don't distribute those resources equally, or attempt to do so anyhow, you create resentment. There are African Guyanese who believe some of the racist nonsense they have been told for generations, that African people can't do business. That's stupid. But you don't know it's stupid because you don't know that African people organize the retail trade in Guyana. You don't know that African people were the first traders in the world, simply because they were the first human beings who developed the first societies, who developed the first civilizations in the world.
But sorry, Doc, doesn't that come right up your alleyway then? Isn't it important how we teach history to our young people?
But this is what I'm talking about, education.
Right. No, I understand that as a general term, but isn't one of the consequences of the lack of appreciation, of true appreciation of what has happened in the past, a result of the way how we teach our children history? And it's not even made an important subject. It's almost, it's and they teach you Columbus came, etc., etc. How important is the content of what we teach in our history classes to the development of a modern Guyana?
Well, just a quickie. We have 4 minutes left. So
sorry.
That's all right. Go ahead. Press on.
I thought this was an introduction.
No, it's a big program number 2 to be continued.
Okay, I hope so. Nigel, that's an extremely important point. When we talk about history, we usually talk about political history, right?
Oh, we talk about when the white people first came.
Yes, but for me, when I said history is social history, I want us to understand that society, the history of society, is what history should be. So if you're talking about history, all right, we could leave that for another program. But in Guyana today, we don't teach history. And the little history we teach is misleading. And unless there is a serious attempt to teach the history of Guyana as it should be taught, we will not be producing citizens who are as aware as they ought to be, so who could take decisions that are as informed as they could be. And, in August, there will be the 200th anniversary.
The bicentennial, 1823.
Yes. Now, a lot of Guyanese would see that as an African rebellion against enslavement. Yes, it was. But it was part of the Guyanese struggle for freedom and justice. So it has implications, significance for all Guyanese. But do we, those of us who call ourselves teachers and historians and all of these things, do we explain that event in those terms? And when I talk about teaching history appropriately, that's one of the things I'm talking about. You're an eminent person in the law, Nigel.
I don't think so, but you're kind. Go ahead.
Yeah, and I know that when I studied law, when you studied law in England or elsewhere, they start with English law.
Yeah.
They tell you nothing about the legal codes of Africa, India, China, and all of those places. Is it not part of the solution to our problems that we at least have a course in law that teaches our Guyanese people, at least, and certainly Caribbean and elsewhere, what the legal codes were in all of the constituent peoples that make up the Republic of Guyana today.
Absolutely. You have my full blessed support
I
on
want to
that.
say something
Amen.
else.
We all.
This is not only for law.
Everything.
Exactly. I mean, how many? I teach some courses in history and significance of race in America and in the world and so on. And some of my students look at me perplexed when I say to them that African people had advanced mathematics, and that further they know, they have evidence of this, and they're so accustomed to this negative view.
I have seen it in the Qatar Museum. It is there.
Well, I'm talking about not even those kinds of evidence.
You could go to Pythagoras, who took it from the Egyptians. Yes, absolutely.
Hold on, let's get it straight. You have the pyramids there. How did these things appear? Do you think you could wake up one day and say, we're going to build a pyramid? No. You got to get thousands of people. You're talking about logistics.
Yeah.
You're talking about architecture. You're talking about engineering. You're talking about project planning. All of this is involved in that. And when I challenge some of my students and say, well, they must have known more than Pythagoras because they built the pyramid before he was born. And those of us who are scholars in this area know that the Egyptians had, their own mathematical things. For example, there's something they call the secant, which told them what angle the sides of a pyramid must have if you had the base stated, in terms of the area of the base and the height you wanted to go. They could calculate. These people had pi. So I'm just saying this to say that we don't know the history of ourselves, and it's because of colonialism. Europe could not go around the world mashing up other people's places while saying the truth about those people, especially when the truth is that they were more advanced in Europe than Europe. And this is a fact. The only way that Europe excelled was in firearms and military technology. And
which they took from the Chinese.
Yes, substantially gunpowder. And in some mentality that made them able to carry out massacres on people, innocent people. So we must know this kind of things about ourselves. I want to close this section with one thing.
Yes.
Listen to most of us at the most auspicious occasions. And we start with quotations. We quote Plato, we quote Pythagoras, we quote Shakespeare. And I'm not telling you those are not eminent intellectuals. But the people of China, India, Africa, and Native America,
and the Arabs,
were writing and being profound philosophers for thousands of years before Europe. Fact is, Europeans were civilized by Africans and Arabs. Yes. So how come our intellectual horizons is limited by a racist, Eurocentric interpretation of the world that excludes Sun Tzu from China, for example, that exclude Tahotep and many others from Africa? We don't even know these names. That exclude people from India who had made profound contributions to the intellectual heritage of humanity. These are questions we need to answer.
Brothers, our time is up, but before we go in, we offer solutions. And I'm sure the government is listening. Brother Kimani, can you offer 3 quick suggestions that the government of Guyana can do to make a start? Because this program, we want to offer solution as guides, because we all want Guyana to succeed and to successful. As Warren Buffett says, when the tide is out, only then you know who is naked. So you want all to be rising with the tide. And the one last question, I am impressed beyond imagination to just listen to you. I've heard. I know you're busy at Temple University. Are you available to assist the government of the Guyana to get on a correct path? And if so, yes, and I'll make sure immediately we finish 5 top PPP persons will get your response. Nothing to hide. We have to be open and transparent. We are interested in Guyana. You can help. You can make a difference.
Well, yeah, I'm here to help. I don't have that problem.
Okay.
But let me go back to your challenge of 3 solutions. And Nigel and I think Nigel put forward one,
Okay.
right? And, education, appropriate education is one.
Okay.
2, equitable distribution of resources. We haven't mentioned reparations yet and the whole question of equity, because equity, just coming now and distributing resources equally today wouldn't solve the problem. It will go somewhere towards solving the problem. But when you look at the fact that African Guyanese, for example, have been deprived from our entire history in the country, that tells you something. There's something that are specific to certain sections of our population, and we could address that at another time. The other thing I think Nigel and I would agree on is a popular response, which means involve the people. We have to go through the length and the breadth of Guyana and say, buddy, what do you think about this race thing, man? We got to call people together. We got to say, look, we planning to do so and so. What y'all think about this? And in closing, let me say this. I was told recently, and I know this happened some years ago, that people in an African Guyanese village were offered, let's say, development. It doesn't matter what it is. What is important to me, what's significant, is that these people say, nah, we ain't want it because there is a PPP initiative. I mean, when we get to that level, it tells you something about us as a people. Yes. And it's very important that in our attempts to correct what we think is wrong and what we know is wrong among us, that we just do not put plasters on sores. We need a wide-ranging program that will educate our people also about the civic duties and responsibilities. We have to be different. We have to know that when whosoever it is comes to us and say, I'm going to give you a playground or whatsoever, it's the people's money that person is spending. It's not their personal money. And that should be the beginning of our evaluation of how we're going to respond to that. Of course, you got to look at it in terms of what the needs of these people are, what's the more pressing needs, how are resources being distributed in general. So for me, part of the response has got to be a popular element that puts things out there and encourage people not only to educate themselves, but also to be involved in decision making from the ground up. And
Brother Dr. Kamani, thank you. Let me assure you that this tape will be shown on the TV after 8 o'clock. It is available. As soon as I receive it, the first person who will get it is the president. The second person who will get it, perhaps in the same string of 5, will be Dr. VP Jagdeo, Dr. Anthony, because he's on my string, Peter Ramsaroop, and Eddie Boyer. Have nothing to hide. The tape will be given, the 3 comments will be given, and they will hear for themselves. Nothing to hide. I'm sure they all want Guyana to be better for all. Brother Nigel, your closing comments before we wrap up?
I have one. My comment is one regret that this program wasn't longer. I think the privilege of having somebody like Kamani, Dr. Nehusi, on a program like this is part of the long-term development project for Guyana. And, it's not a quick fix. There's so many areas. There's no way you can cover, even if you took 1838 to present politics, you can cover that in the program. So my regret is that, we don't have enough time. I want to commend, however, the Alliance for Change for having taken the bold step of putting race on the national agenda and having invited an expert to come and discuss it. And I can only hope that this engenders and encourages other discussions on this vexed topic going forward.
Wow, what a discussion that was, folks. What a discussion that was. What a discussion that was. I sorry I can't stick around and unpack. We got to try to get Dr. Nahusi on our own programs. We got to get more of Nigel, of course, more of Dr. Ali on our programs. We got to get these guys, more of them on our programs. Folks, we got to run. We're just about out of time. Of course, if you have a story for us, guys, you got a story by your end, 627-6963. You got a story for us. We got some advertising space as well, folks. Right here, we got some advertising space for your business, your product, your service, your event. Right here, we got some advertising space for you guys. Right here, like right there. And folks, of course, we cannot do this without you. We are available to partner with you guys. And thank you for your contributions that we can keep moving forward. We're available via Cash App and Zelle and PayPal. MMG MoneyGram, Western Union, folks, you know the drill. All the information is right there. We got to run. We're going to see you guys back this evening in the ring, folks, in the ring. More valid and credible information. Thanks for joining us, good folks. Thanks for joining us. Thank you, all of you. I see you all out there. I see each and every one. We see you all. Thanks for joining us. Stay safe. See you back.